The baby's tiny hand slipped from her grasp just as her head tilted sideways, and in that fragile, unguarded moment, the entire first-class cabin seemed to hold its breath. Madison had promised herself she wouldn't fall asleep. Not here. Not beside a man whose suit probably cost more than her entire wardrobe. Not while her 6-month-old son, Noah, lay curled against her chest, his breathing soft and uneven from the cold she couldn't afford to treat properly. But exhaustion is merciless, and when it comes for you, pride is the first thing it steals. If you had been in her place 3 nights without rest, a cross-country flight you could barely afford, a baby who needed you every second, would you have lasted any longer? She had boarded the flight in Chicago with shaking hands and a borrowed diaper bag. The ticket had been purchased with the last of her savings after her landlord gave her 72 hours to leave. The only place she had left was Seattle, where a distant aunt she barely knew had agreed to let her stay for a while. Those words had echoed in her mind with both hope and humiliation. For a while. Not permanently. Just long enough to figure out the rest of her broken life. The cabin crew had hesitated when they scanned her boarding pass. She didn't belong in first class. Her jeans were faded at the knees. Her sneakers were scuffed and one size too big, a thrift store miracle. But the ticket had been upgraded at the last minute by an automated system she didn't understand. She had taken the seat quietly, avoiding every curious glance. Next to her sat a man in his early 30s with sharp features, neatly styled brown hair, and the composed stillness of someone accustomed to control. His navy suit was tailored perfectly, his watch understated but unmistakably expensive. His name, she later learned, was Alexander Reed. At that moment, he was simply the kind of man she tried not to look at too long because men like him never saw women like her. Noah had begun crying shortly after takeoff, his small face scrunched with discomfort. Madison had rocked him gently, whispering apologies to the cabin, to the universe, to the strangers whose peace she felt she was disturbing. The man beside her had glanced once, then twice, not with irritation but with something unreadable. She braced herself for the sigh, the complaint, the request to move. It never came. Instead, he had adjusted his seat slightly to give her more space. That small kindness had nearly undone her. The plane leveled out, the cabin lights dimmed, and fatigue wrapped around her like a heavy blanket. She tried to keep her head upright. She tried to focus on the safety card, on the faint hum of the engines, on anything that would anchor her to consciousness. But Noah's warmth against her chest and the gentle vibration of the aircraft lulled her into a sleep so deep it felt like surrender. Her head slipped. It landed against Alexander's shoulder. In her sleep, she didn't notice. She didn't feel the shift of his body as he stiffened at first, surprised. She didn't see the way his eyes flicked down at the baby nestled between them. She didn't know that the cabin attendant paused mid-step, watching the unlikely trio with soft curiosity. Alexander could have moved. He could have nudged her awake, reclaimed his space, re-established the invisible wall of class and circumstance that separated them. Instead, he stayed very still. Noah stirred, his tiny fingers curling around the lapel of Alexander's jacket. Something in Alexander's chest tightened. He had built his life on precision and distance. As CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, he managed acquisitions worth millions without blinking. He made decisions that affected thousands of employees. He understood markets, risks, numbers. But he did not understand the unfamiliar warmth of a stranger leaning on him, trusting him without knowing his name. He looked at Madison's face more closely. Even in sleep, there was tension there. Faint dark circles beneath her eyes. A small bruise near her wrist, old and yellowing. The kind of mark someone tried to hide. He felt a quiet anger rise in him, though he didn't know why. If this had been your sister, your daughter, what would you have wanted a stranger to do? The flight stretched on, and somewhere over the Midwest, Alexander did something he hadn't done in years. He cared. When turbulence hit, sharp and sudden, Madison jolted awake. Her heart pounded before her eyes fully opened. For one disoriented second, she didn't know where she was. Then she felt it, the firm shoulder beneath her cheek. The warmth beside her that wasn't her own. She shot upright instantly. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling, though the words barely made it past her lips. She expected annoyance, embarrassment, perhaps even ridicule. Instead, she found Alexander looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite place. It wasn't pity. It wasn't superiority. It was concern. "You were exhausted," he said quietly. Two simple words. Exhausted. As if it were understandable. As if it weren't a failure. Her throat tightened. She nodded, clutching Noah protectively. The baby blinked up at her, unaware of the fragile dignity his mother was trying to gather piece by piece. The rest of the flight passed in silence, but it was no longer uncomfortable. Alexander found himself asking gentle questions, not intrusive, not demanding. Where she was headed. Whether someone would be meeting her. Whether Noah needed warm water for his bottle. Madison answered cautiously at first. Life had taught her that kindness often came with conditions. But there was no hidden agenda in his voice, no subtle judgment. She told him she was starting over. She didn't mention the boyfriend who had disappeared the moment he learned she was pregnant. She didn't describe the nights she had worked double shifts at a diner while hiding morning sickness. She didn't confess how eviction notices felt like personal failures nailed to her door. But somehow, he understood more than she said. When the plane began its descent into Seattle, rain streaking across the windows, Madison felt a strange sadness. This small pocket of safety was ending. Soon she would step back into uncertainty. They landed. Passengers gathered their belongings. The illusion of closeness dissolved as reality returned. Madison stood carefully, adjusting Noah on her hip. Alexander retrieved his briefcase, then hesitated. "Do you have somewhere safe to go tonight?" he asked. The question pierced deeper than she expected. Safe. What did that even mean anymore? "Yes," she replied automatically, though her voice lacked conviction. He studied her for a moment longer, then handed her a simple white card. His name. A number. No title printed, just Alexander Reed. "If you need help," he said, "call." She nodded politely, already certain she wouldn't. Men like him offered help out of courtesy. Women like her survived by not accepting it. She walked away through the terminal, the crowd swallowing her small frame. Alexander watched until he couldn't see her anymore. He told himself it was nothing. A fleeting encounter. A moment of human decency. But that night, in his penthouse overlooking the Seattle skyline, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the bruise on her wrist. The way she flinched when turbulence hit. The way she apologized for existing. The next morning, Madison arrived at her aunt's small apartment in a worn-down neighborhood. The space was cramped, the air heavy with cigarette smoke and old carpet. Her aunt, Patricia, was not unkind, but she was tired of her own struggles and had little patience for someone else's. "You can stay on the couch," Patricia said. "But not forever." Madison nodded, swallowing humiliation. Days turned into weeks. She searched for jobs while juggling Noah's needs. Interviews ended the moment employers learned she had no child care. Savings dwindled to nothing. Patricia's patience thinned. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly crushing rejection, Madison sat on the apartment steps, Noah sleeping in her arms, and stared at the business card she had kept hidden in her wallet. Alexander Reed. What if this happened to you? Would you risk one more disappointment? Or would you hold on to pride, even as everything slipped away? Her fingers trembled as she dialed. She almost hung up when it rang. He answered on the second ring. He recognized her voice immediately. Within an hour, a black car pulled up outside Patricia's building. Madison nearly turned back. She felt exposed, small against the sleek vehicle and the driver waiting patiently. But Noah stirred in her arms. She stepped forward. Alexander met her at his office building downtown. The glass tower loomed like something from another world. She hesitated before entering, acutely aware of her worn jacket and tired eyes. He greeted her not in a boardroom, but in a quiet cafe across the street. Neutral ground. He listened as she finally told the truth. Not every detail, but enough. The eviction. The job losses. The absence of support. The fear. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer immediate solutions. When she finished, he leaned back, thoughtful. I can't fix everything, he said slowly. But I can help you stand. He offered her a position at one of his company's community outreach programs, an administrative role, flexible hours, on-site child care. It wasn't charity. It was employment. Madison felt something shift inside her. Not rescue. Not dependency. Opportunity. The weeks that followed were not magically easy. She worked hard, learning new systems, adapting to an environment that intimidated her. There were whispers at first. Who was she? Why had the CEO taken personal interest? Alexander ignored them. He saw in her a resilience that reminded him of his own mother, who had raised him alone after his father's death. He had grown up watching quiet strength masked by exhaustion. As Madison grew more confident, something else grew too: mutual respect. She challenged him once in a meeting, respectfully but firmly, about funding cuts to a single mother's initiative. The room fell silent. Alexander studied her, then nodded. The funding remained. Months passed. Noah learned to crawl across the polished floors of the child care center, giggling freely. Madison moved into a small apartment of her own. The bruise on her wrist faded, replaced by steady confidence. One evening, long after most employees had left, Madison found Alexander standing by the window of his office, staring at the city lights. You didn't have to help me, she said softly. He didn't turn immediately. Maybe I needed to, he replied. He told her then about his mother's struggles. About how one stranger's job recommendation had changed their trajectory years ago. About how success felt hollow if it wasn't shared. Madison realized something profound in that moment. He hadn't saved her. He had believed in her. And that belief had given her the strength to save herself. Years later, at a company charity gala, Madison stood beside Alexander not as a charity case, not as an employee dependent on his goodwill, but as the director of community programs she had built from the ground up. Noah, now 5, ran between tables, laughing. The journey from that airplane seat to this ballroom had not been a straight line. There had been setbacks, doubts, nights of fear. But there had also been courage, growth, and the quiet power of one decision to reach out instead of giving up. Just before the music began, Madison stepped onto the stage to share her story. She spoke about exhaustion. About pride. About the moment her head fell onto a stranger's shoulder. She didn't frame it as a fairy tale. She framed it as a reminder. Sometimes the smallest acts of compassion redirect entire lives. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is accept help. Before this story ends, I want you to pause for a moment and tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were in Madison's place that night on the airplane. Because life will give you moments like that, moments when you are tired beyond measure, when you feel invisible, when pride and desperation wrestle inside your chest. And in those moments, a stranger's kindness might become your turning point. Madison looked out over the crowd, her voice steady but her eyes shining. She had once been the girl who apologized for falling asleep. Now she was the woman who built doors for others to walk through. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of the power of compassion, or made you believe in second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, but only if it truly meant something to you.